more important even than the psychedelic experience. Individually, we have to reclaim the primacy of direct experience. As people, the real universe is within your reach, always.
Yo, welcome back. Welcome to, if you've never been to the show here before, I'm your host, Eric Osborne, and I am not your guru. Let's get that out of the way. While we're only at the outset of the third chapter, it is safe to say that this has been the most challenging introduction that I have written yet. Not only that, but it's proven to be one of the most challenging pieces that I have written in years. That's good though, right? It must mean that I'm up against some kind of a growth edge. Well, that has a lot to do with the subject of this chapter. Any of you parents out there buy your kids Legos? You know how you like open the box and there's all these bags of Legos kind of separated out into categories? Especially now that Lego sets are like all Harry Potter or Star Wars or Elsa, Frozen, Disney stuff. You know, like when the pieces for the X-Wing versus the Wookiee village are all in separate bags, and like they're separate, but they're whole, right? Like this makes whatever Dumbledore's library, and this makes Harry Potter's dormitory, but it's all part of Hogwarts, right? That's what I'm talking about here. It's many disciplines under one subject umbrella. The subject, as difficult as it is to utter from my mouth, is very difficult, is even more difficult to develop a holistic perspective on, because it encompasses every aspect of our lives. What could this subject be that's so difficult to articulate? Well, it's not that it's really difficult to articulate. It's just that we don't have very good language around it. I'm talking about personal growth, people. I know, it's like cringe of the cringe, right? You're like, I'm going to vomit in my mouth if I hear one more person talk about personal growth. But the reality is it's one of the most, if not the most important subject that is embedded into each and every one of our lives. And it's not something that really should be broken down into these little trivial books or practices. Like, this is about the whole you. This is about becoming really actualized. This is about becoming the most authentic version of yourself. And while yes, we do sit down with some, life coaches and some manifestation coaches, this chapter is not a tribute to Tony Robbins and Abraham Hicks. No, we have some actually very interesting guests, very unique guests in the field of personal development. One of those that I'm most excited to share with you is the conversation with author Philip Shepherd. His book, Radical Wholeness, absolutely changed my life. It is an incredible text that helps understand the interconnectivity of all existence. It's a very psychedelic book without any references to psychedelics. It has helped me to integrate experiences, contextually understand abstract experiences in a way that I've never been able to. The conversation with Philip is incredible. He is such a beautiful soul. I strongly encourage you to pick up his book, Radical Wholeness, before listening to that episode. It'll provide quite a bit of context. If you don't, you're probably going to want to buy the book after the episode, because he is such a phenomenal human being that I think you're going to want to read his work. I know it had a huge impact on the Sanctuary Book Club. That's how I came across it. Russell, the member who facilitates that book club, he put it in my hands and said I had to read it, and boy oh boy was he right. So I've been recommending it everywhere I go. I even talk about it to some of the other people I sit down with in this chapter. So sorry, Doc, your book is amazing too. It's highly recommended as well. But I talked a fair amount about Philip Shepherd's book in the interview with Doc talking about his book too. So we got a ketamine clinician, Doc Askins, who we're talking about personal growth with. So this is just not your typical exploration of personal growth. Despite, or perhaps because of the conversations I've had, it's been a very difficult topic to reflect on. It's like I've taken out all these Legos out of their bags and got them all mixed up, and to make matters worse, the directions are lost. At first glance, the subject seemed really straightforward. Reprogram the subconscious and all that. But after reflecting on my personal experiences, the evolution of the industry, and these conversations overall, it's such a much more difficult topic to succinctly convey and connect all of these different kind of aspects around. But that's just the thing. Personal development is connected to every single aspect of your life, every field of discipline. You can use pretty much every category of your being, from religion and philosophy to sex, drugs, and rock and roll, to become a better version of yourself. Which is another reason why the conversation with Philip Shepherd and his book may prove so helpful in wrapping our heads around this subject. I'm also waiting to hear back from another guest who hopefully will talk with us about the alter ego effect as a way of maximizing personal growth. One example of this is from Chris Berglund's Psychology Today article, Using Rockstar Personas as Identity Construction Blueprints. That's right. You can model yourself after your favorite rock star and see how that can drastically improve the quality of your life. He talks about using this intentional identity construction inspired by rock and roll personalities that he admires to become a more successful version of himself. The idea of the alter ego was popularized by author Todd Herman and his 2019 self-help book, The Alter Ego Effect. I bring that up because Todd Herman, I've heard him talk. I've invited him on the show and I've not gotten a positive response yet. Well, it's not been a negative response. He just hasn't accepted the offer. But he is an incredible human being whose story is worth listening to. And he's also been heavily positively impacted by psychedelics. He speaks openly about being a victim of child sex abuse, having his rape recorded and published online. And when you hear someone like that share their story of success, it's hard not to pay attention. So even if I don't get to have him on the show, I strongly recommend his book and recommend listening to Todd Herman and his work. Now, a little trivia for you. Speaking of self-help books, how many of you out there know or can guess correctly who is credited with writing their very first self-help personal development book? Go ahead. Take a guess. Huh? Did you say Ben Franklin? Did you? You were right. If you said Ben Franklin, you were 100% right. That's correct. The inventor of the bifocals, the lightning rod, many musical instruments, Joe, that, and so much more. He co-authored the Declaration of Independence. He was the first U.S. postmaster. He was the first ambassador to France. The guy charted and named the Gulf Current. He was a Masonic Grand Master and a known member of the London Hellfire Club, which seemed to have been a secret sex society. So he was probably also involved in sex magic. Yes, my kind of guy, Ben Franklin. Of course, he was also an author. His autobiography was published in 1793, a few years after his death. Among his teachings were his 12 virtues to live by, and, of course, he was also an author. His autobiography was published in 1793, a few years after his death. Among his teachings were his 12 virtues to live by, and a personal development calendar/planner that the reader could copy to track one's growth in various aspects of the self. And this is absolutely considered to be the very first self-help book. Ben Franklin is also attributed to with the quote of, "Behind every great man stands a woman, and behind every great nation there are wise and courageous women who shape its destiny." And I think that it's important for me to at least point out that the women in my life, yes, the lovers, the friends, and the colleagues have been some of the most important catalysts and motivation in my personal growth journey. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It's remarkable, really. It did take a while for the self-help genre to catch on, 1793 to 1980s or so. And even still, it's grown rapidly in recent years. According to Dan Sabato in his Medium article, it said self-help book titles tripled from 2013 to 2019. So the number of self-help books in 6 years tripled. And in 2020, the industry was worth $10.5 billion. That's just the books, not the workshops and the seminars and all that, right? It's one of the fastest growing nonfiction categories. The self-help book industry is predicted to grow to $14 billion by 2025. So it might make you cringe, but it's obviously a relevant subject. And when you think about it, Ben Franklin is a great founder for the field of self-expertise. Now, I know. To many of you and to me, it's cringe. All this personal development, self-help, DIY therapy, be your own guru stuff. But that's where the growth is, baby. You got to embrace the cringe. And speaking of cringe and embracing it, let me do that right now in front of you, while I also express my sincere apologies and embarrassment. So I was really excited to share the interview with April and Amy, the hosts of the Shameless Sex podcast, about as excited as I am to share the Philip Shepard interview. And man, oh man, oh man. They do so much to normalize and educate around sex. I was so happy to share that with my audience, and it's almost unlistenable. The audio is just horrible. I did consider taking the entire episode down because it is so embarrassingly cringe, but that's ultimately why I'm leaving it. Nothing can be done to fix it. Restream, the platform that we use to record virtual interviews, updated, and the echo cancellation setting apparently reset. Thanks, Restream. But hey, my responsibility. I should have checked that. It is what it is. I am embracing the cringe, but I'm really sorry too. Honestly, nothing has helped me in my personal growth journey like embracing embarrassment. Fortunately, that's not the only method to become a better being. Many more enjoyable modalities can be employed on the path. But from my relationship with my lovers and my friends to my attempts at public speaking and community building, you gotta be able to eat some shit. That's just how it happens. Sometimes you gotta eat shit in public. But, you know, it's good for the mushrooms, right? Terry? Huh? Shit? Good for mushrooms? Yeah? Anyway, embrace the cringe. The mushrooms do. Why shouldn't we? Whether you came to humility through your attempts to be a teacher or you became a teacher through your repeated humbling, we eventually all come to realize that we are all personal development coaches. To ourselves first, and then by default through example to each other. It's when we choose to become the coach or the teacher that things can go off the rails, quite honestly. Yes, there are risks. We all know someone that has gone off the deep end with the law of attraction, someone who thinks that they don't have to make any effort, just believe and you'll receive. Meanwhile, they're bumming cigarettes, conveniently forgetting their wallet, and whenever you need to share some challenging life experience, they meet you with some kind of spiritual bypass mumbo jumbo. These folks are in denial, pretending what's happening isn't happening. And you know what? God bless them. They are right where they need to be on their journey, and so are you. But we don't achieve mental, physical, or spiritual growth by doing what is easy, by avoiding work and hard conversations. No, no, no. On the contrary, we have to face our fears, not wave them away with a magic wand. Obviously, we don't want to continually berate ourselves for falling short, but right now, self-help sadomasochism isn't nearly the concern that the law of avoidance seems to be. We're all personal development teachers, like it or not. In fact, someone looks to you as an example. Maybe they look to you as an example of what not to be. Maybe they see you as an example of mediocrity, or maybe, hopefully, some form of greatness. What do you think? Do you think those who know you see you as a teacher of avoidance or embracing? Do they see you as an educator of patience or self-mastery? And if so, to what degree? You see, I now see the personal development world as an emerging frontier where the radically whole human is able to step forward. But who knows? Maybe you've arrived at your preferred self and have no more evolving to do. That would be kind of odd, though, wouldn't it? A human who has no more desire to experience new things, to improve the quality of their life. Eventually, each human, simply by following their highest joyful inspiration, will fulfill their God-given mission and thereby inspire others to do so. By participating in this unfolding evolutionary process without impediment, the human being can once again realize godhood and escape this kind of insane reality we seem to have created. A reality that pretends there aren't enough resources for everyone. I don't see personal development devolving into a bunch of love-and-light gurus that either want to live in the Taj Mahal or couch surf and use Palo Santo as perfume. I think it's going to even out where many, hopefully eventually all of us, recognize that we are each an interface with the infinite, and that by seeing the Christ, Buddha, Indra, Mother Teresa, Sojourner Truth, Haile Selassie within ourselves and each other, we can earn a comfortable living just by being ourselves. The more we realize this divine self, it only makes sense that we try to help others find it in themselves. And it seems to be an unending journey. There's so many selves that we each have that can be developed to greater refinement. The spiritual, physical, emotional, financial selves, the selves that have interpersonal relationships with animals or others in various sets and settings, the self that consumes, the self that creates. It's fascinating, really, how many selves we have. And each of you can help another person develop an aspect of themselves. What an opportunity to be teachers and students to each other. But what about when we need therapists or a psychiatrist? What about when a coach or a good friend just won't do? It's been a pretty persistent question that's come out of this exploration of personal development, because that world isn't just limited to expanding your professional empire, and mental health matters aren't limited to strictly states of mind. One of the guests who illustrated this the most was Nicole Daedone. This, shall we say, notorious personal growth teacher brought oming to the world. Not om chanting, although you could do the two omings simultaneously, probably to greater effect, but oming as in O-M-ing. It stands for orgasmic meditation. Ing. As if this weren't cutting edge enough, Nicole is now also taking her recent federal charges for human enslavement, to which she pleads innocently and falsely accused, as an opportunity to grow even more as a person and take on cancel culture. Despite her teaching the use of orgasm for improved personal growth, that's not what our conversation centers around. That's so last chapter. I came across an Instagram live event she was doing called canceling as a spiritual practice, where Nicole and 3 other teachers were discussing the misuse and dangers of cancel culture and how creatives can use this experience to reach higher levels of confidence and ability rather than the inverse. This was such a helpful conversation for me, and it's linked in the show notes if you'd like to give it a listen. The attempts at canceling my voice for not singing with the psychedelic choir, so to speak, have long represented a perceived hurdle to my career as a psychedelic educator and practitioner. I've admittedly allowed the negative and completely false, or at best excessively exaggerated, claims about myself and my work to impede my growth more than I would like to admit. I've used this as an excuse to prevent me from reaching my next plateau, when the truth is that these experiences are meant to be and become the stepping stones that lead us to greater success. What is success anyway? Money and all that jazz? Relationships and great sex? Kids who do good in school and eat all their vegetables? What if success was authenticity and all of those add-ons were just a result of living an authentic life? I mean, that seems to be much of the conclusion from the conversation with Nicole. And isn't this the ultimate goal of therapy as well? To get to your most authentic self? Again, crossover, tons of it. Earl Nightingale, one of the godfathers of personal development, said, "Success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal." That's my Earl impersonation. And that definition takes a lot of pressure off of success, doesn't it? So let's get back to this question, though. I think this is real important, of therapist versus coach. Now, I hope you don't mind if I provide a little bit of an anecdote. It does get pretty personal, but I trust that it will provide some value. All right, for those of you who don't know, my wife and I, in 2013, started the psilocybin mushroom trend that is now Jamaican mushroom retreats. Working with these mushrooms for spiritual exploration, it's been my jam for quite a while. Being the first to do this work publicly, we, particularly me, got a lot of praise and a lot of criticism. Now, as you might imagine, those 7 years working with, an ever-increasing load of severely traumatized or deeply troubled individuals started to take a toll on me. When I came back from Jamaica, I was on the verge of a mental breakdown. Since leaving the retreat scene, Courtney and I have spoken a fair amount publicly about how detrimental it was to my mental health. We may have saved many lives, we may have helped many people, but it almost destroyed me and our marriage, quite honestly. It would be all but impossible to communicate to you the extent to which psychic transference and secondary trauma impact psychedelic facilitators, particularly those who are overworked. This is a topic that is going to require great consideration as the field develops. And while it did take a serious toll on me, in many ways I owe my own mental health recovery and personal growth journey to the tribulations endured throughout what I now call the MICO experience. We do eventually find that our traumas become our greatest teachers. What's especially ironic looking back is that the entire time running these retreats, despite being acutely exposed to a variety of pretty extreme mental health conditions, at no point in my life has it ever crossed my mind that I might have a mental illness, or as I prefer to identify, that I might be neurodivergent. My suicidal tendencies had been a daily companion since middle school. My slow burn of self-harm included the overconsumption of tobacco, alcohol, pornography, and fast food. My constant internal dialogue was one of self-loathing. And no matter how hard I worked, no matter how many people I helped, it was never enough. Everyone I worked for and with in the mushroom world deserved compassion. It was easy to see that their mental health challenges were just the shadow of a great many gifts. But not me. Nope, the world would be better off without me. And the last thing a piece of shit like me deserved was compassion. The disconnect was astounding, honestly. The extreme negative bias, a trait of particular to my condition, clouded any moments of self-reflection and further reinforced the knowing that there was no help for me. After every retreat, the only way I knew to flush my system of the torturous, conflicting energy was with Red Stripe, rum, and weed. Plan was white knuckle it to the grave, however that fate was met. Many nights I would imagine it would come at my own hands, visualizing myself taking a small boat out to sea and throwing myself overboard with a large rock tied around my neck. Laying there in bed, listening to the ocean, knowing that there were a slew of boats at my disposal right there on the beach, did not make it any easier. Fortunately, during a moment of absolute breakdown, at perhaps my most suicidal period ever, well, no, that was actually the 8 weeks of house arrest in 2015, but either way, in a moment when I was on the floor crying with my head in my hands, rhetorically asking out loud, why do you keep doing this to yourself, Eric? Why do you keep sabotaging your life? Courtney, standing in front of me, said, Eric, I've been reading about it for a while, and I've been waiting for a time to tell you, I think you have borderline personality disorder. Well, it was like the world stood still for a few moments just before a barrage of asteroids slammed into the surface. Up until that point, I had only been to a few therapy sessions. I had never been diagnosed with anything, but of course I had been prescribed meds, Zoloft. I took it for about 2 weeks and felt like a fucking zombie and decided to self-medicate with cannabis. That was in like 2001. Fast forward to 2020, and the self-medication had become an addiction that was being used to disguise my suffering, not overcome it. So I was increasingly mentally unwell, working to help as many mentally unwell people as I could, in the hopes of validating my own worth, which we all know doesn't work. And it was all crashing down around me with those 3 letters, BPD. The very first therapist I had hired to work those retreats, God bless her, had told me on numerous occasions, I won't work with BPD clients. They are legitimately crazy and hopeless. And I mean, she was the professional. She had been a therapist for decades. I just took it at face value. What did I know? I didn't even know what BPD was then. So when Courtney dropped her diagnosis on me, initially it added to my despair. When I started looking into the symptoms of borderline, it became even more impossible to see the light. It was clear that I had all 9 traits, and it was clear that BPD is considered one of the most difficult mental health diagnoses to manage. But it was also clear that it wasn't hopeless. There were techniques and methods that helped. And yes, most therapists misunderstood the prognosis. Without going too far into it, for many decades, borderline was indeed believed to be untreatable. The name itself indicates the sufferer is borderline schizophrenic. It is the mental health illness with the highest rate of successful suicide attempts. Thankfully, over the last 3 years, the superpower side of the condition has started to reveal itself. It would seem the flipping of that switch is simply listening to and following my own intuition. But it wasn't therapy that helped me. I can only speak for myself, but it wasn't working with a therapist that did the trick. And the trick is, of course, that it's a continuous process. A little more on that later. In Jamaica, my intuition had been telling me for a time that Micah was moving away from what it intended to be, and it was becoming clear that the nonprofit and spiritually centered approach to psilocybin was much more in line with my ethos. We sold the company, came back to the States, and had a little cushion for the first time. I took a much-needed sabbatical and got a therapist. couple actually, but they didn't last long. After 3 or 4 months, it became apparent that those weekly uninsured visits were the least helpful change implemented. What was helping? A daily personal growth practice centered around identity construction, and of course, or community. You thought I was going to say mushrooms, didn't you? Well, I got news for you. Mushrooms ain't where it's at. It is already in us. That's what the mushrooms show us. And we need desperately, more than mushrooms, each other to see it in ourselves. So, probably going to ruffle some feathers with what I'm about to say here, but you want to know the big joke about psychedelic therapy? We don't need either one, psychedelics or therapy. What we need is each other. Vulnerable, real, raw. But the ego is so scared of the cringe that we've got to give ourselves these permission slips, these containers to let go, to inch or be hurled towards authenticity. That's not to say we don't or won't need mental health professionals or therapists, but I do bet what those jobs look like changes. For the overwhelming majority of people, a handful of curious and compassionate friends that are willing to authentically explore personal ethics, behaviors, beliefs, and other aspects of human existence with the help of psilocybin or other psychedelics, we will have more positive impact on individuals and society than countless hours of talk therapy, CBT, DBT, you name it. I've had good therapists. I've worked side by side with great therapists. I've held space for hundreds of therapists on their mushroom journeys, and many have expressed great appreciation for my untrained, uncertified ability to help them navigate traumatic memories, difficult decisions, spiritual crises, and more. I have watched God knows how many nurses, teachers, milk truck drivers, honest to God, one of the best facilitators, psychedelic coaches I've ever known was a young man who was a milk truck driver right before he started as a psychedelic facilitator. I've watched these people help therapists find healing, work their way through the integration process. And it's been an unspeakable privilege to watch hundreds and hundreds of severely traumatized men and women heal from those traumas through a little more than a handful of mushrooms in the caring presence of their peers. By the way, I think it's worth noting that nurses make far better trip sitters than the vast majority of therapists that I've seen in the space. They tend to have the endurance and the compassion requisite of someone in that role. So I feel like that's worth communicating out. Right now, one of the best space holders I know is a veteran who is retired from professional bodybuilding over an injury. I mean, it's so beautiful to me when I see these big, bad, tattoo-covered motherfuckers turning into some of the most compassionate, gentle, kind souls that you'll ever meet, holding space so intently, so delicately. It's fucking beautiful. What's up, Jeff? Big up yourself, brother. My point is, in a healthy society where we have vibrant communities, empathically engaged with one another, especially spiritually focused communities that intentionally employ psychedelics, the job of the therapist will be dispersed. I'm not downing the career. I just look forward to the day when we are all each other's therapist, when we are all our own guru. As I was listening to content around this topic for consideration here and for my own personal benefit, I stumbled upon a psychotherapist at Harvard who is fast becoming one of my favorite communicators on the topic. In his recent interview with Chris Williamson, linked in the show notes, this Harvard psychiatrist and medical school instructor known on the socials as Dr. K or Healthy Gamer, He speaks directly to this subject, saying that with healthy communities where people have caring friends and family who are willing to listen attentively and ask caring questions, that psychologists, psychiatrists, and therapists would basically be out of jobs. Now, that's not what we want. Obviously, as industries shift, our careers have to shift. But do we really want our friends and family to be healthy and happy? I think so, yeah. And does that really require hundreds of thousands of dollars, pharmaceuticals, and all that jazz? It doesn't seem so, at least not in the vast majority of cases. Our sanctuary community is seeing this in real time, that's for sure. People who have been in years of therapy, who have been on SSRIs or other psych meds for decades, are achieving incredible growth and healing from simply vulnerable conversations. I mean, oftentimes actually, we're seeing a lot of progress in people before they even start taking mushrooms. You throw psilocybin on top of an intentional, spiritual, empathic, compassionate community, and you have a recipe for serious success. Equally, within Sanctuary and these communities, not just Sanctuary, but communities like Sanctuary, folks like myself who have been taking mushrooms intentionally, but without consistent community or personal growth practice for real reflection and mentorship, we're finding incredible progress in areas that have been really challenging for years. People in my life have said, Eric, you have made massive improvements in the last 2 or 3 years. I've been taking mushrooms intentionally, devotedly, since 1999, with the intention of life-changing personal improvement. What catalyzed the change, though, is community. I will not stop shouting from the mountaintops how crucial community is, whether you are psychedelic or not. If you are, you're going to have a really strong community. Well, as long as it's ethically upheld. Anyway, coming out of our celebration, get it? And the Kentucky Mushroom Festival last month, and spending so much time with people that I love and who I know love me, it brought me an incredible sense of ease and comfort, like deep into my heart. Even struggling with a broken leg, I had felt more grateful than ever. And this is by far, like this period of my life is by far the most that I've ever loved myself. And I owe it to my community, honestly. I've not even had alcohol for several months. I exercise regularly. I'm more calm and peaceful to my children and family. I'm in a loving, mutually nurturing relationship with 2 fabulous, powerful, beautiful women for almost 2 years. I mean, there's so many things that I can list. But what's important, though, is what has changed. Outwardly, very little. Inwardly, though, massively. And this is what allows me to see and experience the outside world in a new way. With mushrooms, with the community, it is rocket fuel for self-actualization. All right, my suicidal thoughts, they completely disappeared. And when I do have borderline episodes and begin a spiral, it's a whole lot easier for me to feel validated by my community that sees me for who I am, rather than the old stories that I'm in the process of rewriting. This allows me to validate myself. My PGP, personal growth practice, has become more consistent and dynamic with the accountability and the inspiration of friends. So where does that leave us in our exploration of personal growth and the coaches and therapists that help us become better versions of ourselves? I mean, I think it leaves us to decide what kind of encouragement and support is right for us, while providing the opportunity to be the same for others. Another secret that is soon to be widely revealed is that by helping others in our communities is how we help ourselves. Radically whole. We are each other. It's like when we lived in Jamaica. This is always so funny to me. Basically, everybody in the countryside owned a corner bar or like sold beer out of a cooler. Like everybody was just buying beer from each other, keeping each other in business. I don't have any idea where the money came from. It's like it was just like traded back around for beer. But maybe this will be a healthy version of that. Instead of being each other's enablers, we can be each other's empowerment. That's what we want to be, isn't it? Now, there is another pitfall to this world that we want to draw our attention to, and that is the cult of the guru. It is alive and well. Granted, there are lots of new looks to the same old shtick. Your Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat guru can look a lot different than a seductive swami or a manipulative minister. Equally, we find the cult of the guru in political leaders, Dr. Fauci's, all of the folks that we think have the answer. It's all over the place. We keep giving our power away. But if you're out there thinking too, I'm sure, like, Eric, what about you? Aren't you trying to get followers? Aren't you trying to be seen? I know. It's a head fuck, honestly. And that's one of the reasons why a podcast or any kind of entrepreneurial endeavor can be like rocket fuel for personal growth or perhaps personal implosion. That does seem to be the case, does it not? I mean, in 10 years, I'll either be an angel investor or screaming at people on the sidewalk from my toothless methed out mouth. In all seriousness, though, maybe it's time we put more responsibility on those who blindly follow rather than those who deceptively lead. It's probably a good time to tell you that when I first came back from Jamaica and I had that little bit of a cushion, I enrolled in a Bob Proctor program, which I was basically, I don't want to say cheated, but they got $15K out of me that they probably shouldn't have. They definitely shouldn't have. The representative who I spoke to over the phone, she felt and could tell how enthusiastic I was about personal growth and my frustration with therapy and the lack of progress. And she assured me that these programs were right for me. What she didn't tell me that I was basically buying the same two programs under different names and different looks. It was a painful lesson that was pretty discouraging for a while. But when I took responsibility for my own impulsivity, the lesson took on $15,000 worth of value. And that's what I'm suggesting here, is that we all begin to take radical responsibility, complete and total ownership for all of our experience. This concept, previously foreign to me, has been instrumental in improving my mental health and my day-to-day experience. Whatever I'm going through, it might not be my fault, but it's damn sure my responsibility to deal with. My mood, my responsibility. My income, my responsibility. My kids, my responsibility. My sexual desire and satisfaction, you guessed it. All of it is ultimately my responsibility. And I can choose to move towards or away from anything that impacts me in ways that I don't desire. Can't physically move? Well, it's still my responsibility to respond in the healthiest way possible. And it's also an incredible responsibility to have any kind of influence or impact on others. To those of you who wrote in or personally shared with me the value you found in the conversations around sexuality, you are welcome. One of the goals of this show is to help others feel comfortable in their uncertainty, to know that there are others out there exploring the same topics in open-minded, curious ways with a willingness to change our perspectives and beliefs based on new information. That is growth. I want to help others embrace their authenticity. I want to bring the most pure version of my light and help, hopefully, your light into this world. Now, as you surely know, the personal development field is, yes, riddled with con artists and flakes. New Age spiritualism without grounded, actionable work is mere spiritual bypassing. So with that understanding, this chapter is no way an endorsement for these coaches and leaders or educators that are included. Some of them may be complete shills. That's not my intuition, but it takes time to get to know someone, especially someone who puts themselves in the teacher role. Every person we meet is flawed. Do not put them on a pedestal. Do not put me on a pedestal. Forgive them. Forgive me before we sin, and you won't have to when we sin. This does not mean that we should tolerate malice, nor must we continue to share space with those who cannot or will not take responsibility for their actions and experience. The day that we take radical responsibility for our lives, for every emotion, every encounter, every moment, then we become the most powerful person in our universe. Then we are truly empowered to become our most authentic self. So I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Just give something to reflect on, kind of give you an idea of the direction we're going. You're going to hear some great conversations. I look forward to your feedback. Please, please, please share, like, comment, all that stuff. Help get some exposure and help other people gain access to this information, these conversations. Thank you so much. I look forward to our time together. And I'll see you on the other side of the mushroom.